If you could split your car in half so that you and someone else could each take half of the car to where you needed to go, that'd be super useful. Computers can do this. It's very common in business to have a few high-powered computers sectioned into parts for each employee to use a portion of, virtual machines. But because running hundreds or thousands of USB cables for mice, keyboards, and headsets isn't practical, the thin client computer exists to basically take all of your devices you physically interact with and then send their data across the network to one of these virtualized computers, which then sends the image back to your screen. It's like Netflix, except instead of beaming something fun like a movie to you from the internet, it's Microsoft Excel. To see an example of 7 people using just one computer at the same time, check out this video here. The Steam Link launched in 2015, brand new, for $50, and it's basically a thin client you hook up to your TV so that your fast computer back in the bedroom can beam your video games to your TV on the other end of the house. So if a 5-year-old Steam Link was $50, what would you guess a thin client from HP or Dell would cost? Wrong. The cheapest HP thin client at the time of recording is the HP T430 for $291. I've bought your servers and workstations and network gear, but your thin clients are scary.
I have never been so insulted in all my life.
Wait, you're young yet.
It's not expensive because it's well equipped. We're talking 2 gigs of RAM and 2 Celeron cores, 16 gigs of eMMC memory. You get the idea. It ain't running Crysis. Or probably even streaming a video of someone else playing Crysis, quite frankly. I have a computer with 16 gigs of storage. It's so little storage, desktop Windows 10 cannot update. Wait a second. That sounds like a feature. The computer I'm referring to is the Atomic Pi, which is not $291. It's cheap. But we can do something even better than an Atomic Pi for this scenario. For business is always more expensive than consumer gear. Check out these 2 nearly identical computers from HP, where the consumer version is better equipped and cheaper. Of course, building a computer at Micro Center on your own is cheaper than both. And I don't mean to pick on HP in this case. The reason I'm using them is because their website is a lot easier to work with than Dell's for building comparable systems between consumer and business, just to demonstrate the point. So what we're going to do today is take a look at the Raspberry Pi and build it into something better and cheaper. And who knows, if enough of you share this video, HP, Dell, Lenovo, and whoever else might not sell another thin client again. Even without the incredible accessories we'll get to in just a minute, the base Raspberry Pi 4B is a fantastic starting point. Because it's just one piece plus a micro SD card, if it doesn't boot up, your IT guy can just swap it out for another one for what, $50, if that? While it may not be as cheap as replacing a component like an SSD in the thin client, you don't have to pay the IT guy 3 hours to troubleshoot it and re-image it, assuming that the thin client was repairable. Also, because the Raspberry Pi has GPIO pins, you can add LED status lights that can turn on or off, kind of like a postcode in a way, but as the system's running, to help diagnose the issue. I have all my Raspberry Pis at home set up with one LED for power, another if it's booted into the OS, and another for drive activity. You could set up other LEDs based on whatever software you're running, or you could add an LED indicator for things like overheating, not being able to reach a specific DNS server. You get the idea. Another win for the Raspberry Pi is its power consumption. My workstation, sitting at the Windows desktop, is about 100 watts. My grandparents' computer, which literally only sends email and opens one browser tab at a time, pulls 90 watts. A Pi is single digits. That's electricity saved. And then you don't have to run the air conditioning, which is a big deal here in Texas, to cool all of that wasted, unnecessary power. Put enough computers in a room and you could heat your whole house for the winter. I've done that. I have literally heated my house with nothing but computer heat in a winter. But let's assume you actually want the thin client to actually just be a low-powered workstation. You're not trying to access a virtual machine across the network. The Pi 4 works just fine as an entry-level workstation. I have one in my garage as a terminal for web interfaces, and my home theater is run by a Raspberry Pi. I'm playing back 25 gigabyte Blu-rays and not even hitting 50% CPU usage. And if dual monitors is a concern, the Raspberry Pi 4 can put out to two 4K monitors at the same time. But now, the fun part. Those accessories I said we'd get to, this is what I think is really going to cinch the deal. All of our configurations are going to start with the Raspberry Pi 4 2GB at $55, which includes heat sinks, a power switch, and a power supply. Add on a high-quality $13 microSD card, and our starting total is $68.39. You can find a Raspberry Pi cheaper in other places, but Amazon pricing will give us a decent enough starting point. Keyboard and mouse really aren't much of a price difference. You can add those onto any of these configurations for less than $10. Likewise, a case for the Raspberry Pi can be printed for under $1 in materials. And having had a job as a 3D printer for a local business to cut costs on buying traditional equipment from regular sources, I personally believe every business over 25 people should have a 3D printer, whether that be a person with a printer or the printer itself. Make sure to check out this video over here to see why the 3D printing hype is real. If the building were to lose power, your servers would likely have UPS systems in place, so while the employees may get disconnected, their unsaved work is not lost. There are three ways we can power these Pi thin clients. We can run standard AC power outlets to every cubicle with no UPS at all. Or for $40 to $70, you can provide a UPS in each one, easily giving 30 minutes plus of runtime to save your work, shut down your system, and if there's no power, no one can work, everyone is able to at least get to a stopping point before they walk out. Something else you could do is get this clip-on UPS for the Pi. Pop in a couple rechargeable lithium-ion cells and your Raspberry Pi has its own compact integrated UPS. The third option, though, could actually help to cut down on cabling throughout the whole building. We're assuming that you're running Ethernet to each cubicle. You can run power over Ethernet, enough power to power a Pi. Doing all of that AC to DC power conversion once in a commercial efficient unit, such as a power over Ethernet switch, is going to be much more efficient than converting AC to DC power at each individual cubicle with cheap USB power converters. This could reduce the electrical outlet needs to just one outlet for the monitor in each cubicle. Power over Ethernet adapters for getting power into the Pi can be had as a hat that goes on the GPIO pins, or a much simpler design that has a USB and Ethernet split. Speaking of GPIO pins, those are incredibly useful. Passwords get shared around the office. As an IT admin, you hope they don't, but they do. Or even worse, those passwords could leak outside the company. But what if your ID badge that your employees all had to get into the building was also used with RFID or magnetic stripe swipe at the cubicle to log into the computer? You could easily implement something that uses the GPIO pins to read those badges. Besides these physical additions that make the Raspberry Pi a far superior option, there's also some other huge advantages the Raspberry Pi has over the thin client in software. Put down in the comments below, when was the last time your Windows 10 computer shut down for automatic updates in the middle of your work? At my day job, these forced updates bring down multiple pieces of equipment whose loaded fuel tanks weigh more than a lot of the cars on the road. That gets very expensive. Thanks to not running Windows, these updates are not an issue on the Raspberry Pi. If you do need to update, it can be delivered remotely by a system admin over SSH with just 2 commands. Level 1 Tech's weekly news podcast features the Security Breach of the Week, where someone in accounting or marketing clicks on a phishing email link, and now the whole office is shut down by ransomware. Because virus.exe is a Windows application, our Raspberry Pi Linux machines are immune to that, most of the time. Of course, while this very fun thought experiment has shown the Pi to be technically superior in every single way, there's still the social issue. Whoever in management that signs the paycheck for the IT admin doesn't want to stop using Windows, even if it's just for the 2 clicks it takes to connect to a Windows virtual machine. But for those IT guys watching this video, there's added security, better features, especially for power backup and cutting down on your electricity bill, easier tech support, just swap out the entire Pi 4 times, and you're still a little bit cheaper than getting a thin client from HP or Dell. So what are your thoughts on the Raspberry Pi as a thin client? Discuss it with me in the comments below. Here's my Raspberry Pi playlist, or you could mosey on over to 3dpc.xyz to download some 3D print designs. Check out my library of 3D printer filament reviews as well. Amazon links to everything shown down in the description. Leave a like, and if you're subscribed, I'll see you in the next one.